I'm Elana Chan. I'm the head of customer marketing here at Google Canada. Tonight, we're here at the very hip Hotel Ocho to talk to two of Canada's top growth marketers, Matt Rivard from Google and Jason Naidu from Shopify. We'll ask them to pull back the curtain on how businesses can drive long-term growth and truly understand who their best customers are and how to predict what they want. You guys have both been in growth marketing for a while. What are some common objectives and common pitfalls you've come across in your time?
I think the first one is just really thinking about defining the metrics that matter for your business. Oftentimes, and I'll also sort of try and weave in some of the pitfalls as well. It would be things like CLV over something like CPC. I think because we can tend to get hung up on metrics that don't really tell the full story when thinking about marketing. There's a whole lot that can go into that. So that would be the first one. The second one would probably be making sure that even if you don't know what to do with it yet, you're collecting data and collecting information. And I meet with a lot of brands that say, we're dumping everything to cloud or we're dumping everything to AWS. We just don't know what to do with it yet. And I think that's fine. I think it's at least having the information and being able to, at some point, mine that. I think one of the questions I've always asked CEOs and CIOs when I meet them for the first time, because typically I am a customer of a lot of Google's customers. I'll give them my personal information and say, pull up everything you know about me. And I've found that very simple question can be very telling about access to information for executives, what data strategies look like, and how much do they actually know about me? Because I know if I'm a good customer or a crappy customer. And if they can tell me that with their models, I know their business is in a healthy spot in terms of lifetime value.
Do you find that people aren't focusing on business outcomes as often as they should be?
Yeah, I would say another piece to that is just making sure that incentives are aligned, making sure that employees that work in your organizations understand how their role in their function ties back to success and actually generating revenue for your organization, particularly if your business is something that primarily functions online. Thinking about CPC and LTV and how those things come together, again, it's taking a step back and doing that exercise to understand how do we get customers, why and how do they churn and where, and what's things like even leads. Just getting a lot of leads is not necessarily a good thing. Like lead quality also comes into that equation as well for lead gen businesses. So I think it's important to take a step back and make sure you're regularly reviewing your strategies, because you don't want to get stuck doing something because that's the way we've always done it.
Yeah, I think especially for a lot of lead gen businesses, or in some cases where even some of your sales or conversions take place offline, it could become very easy to get addicted to that, that initial metric, or almost like optimize against it in a vacuum. And I think it's important to, as you give your teams like that target and that KPI for them to move the needle on, you have to pulse in the time to look downstream. How are these leads converting? Critically review like the different campaigns that are driving the best conversions or not. And ultimately, which we can get to later, like optimizing that against some type of LTV or return on ad spend or margin on ad spend to know that the investments are being made in the right place. You don't want to get addicted to the volume of leads. Allow those leads to come down if you know that you could drive higher quality customers down the other end or incremental revenue.
Have you seen that in your own business?
Yeah, absolutely. So not necessarily Shopify, but at the time, BuildDirect based out of Vancouver, 60% of our conversions took place offline. Customers were making a pretty high-end purchase decision, and at that point they'd have to talk to sales to make that decision. So we spent a lot of time as a marketing team optimizing toward really like leading metrics, know that we were getting customers in to potentially the right sales in the right categories. And as we started to review that, we started to get more and more insight kind of through the funnel as much as we could up to that offline conversion. And we made great strides in optimizing our program. So for example, initially optimizing towards carts. So if people were adding products to their cart, that was like an initial KPI. We knew that we were getting people to make potentially a buying decision. Then we started looking at like the value of the cart. And as we started optimizing towards the value of the cart, we started to make better decisions. And then we started looking at the rate at which carts were being rated for shipping. And so we started kind of moving down the funnel to start to make better decisions around where to allocate our spend.
What does good look like? How should they be thinking about measuring success?
Starting with something like revenue or getting to sort of profit I think are sort of the holy grail, especially on the profit perspective around looking at how marketing can ultimately drive success. So for me, that's what good looks like, is like, can we get down to that level of granularity? And I don't want to open up a can of worms around attribution, but making sure that you're understanding and giving credit where credit is due in some way.
You don't want to make hasty decisions if you're on, say, only first click or last click. Sometimes it's understanding really what your customer's journey actually is, which may not be necessarily reflected by your attribution model. If you know that people are making sophisticated decisions and it's requiring multiple touch points, and you know that you may not necessarily have visibility on all of those touch points, then sometimes making decisions, turning on or off a channel based on your attribution model may cost you opportunity because it may not be capturing the entire picture. But having some attribution is better than none. So do that, invest in that, and add more effort into getting a more comprehensive source of truth of all the touch points or your customer's journey, whether that's research, whether that's more sophisticated attribution, but really understand that journey that your customers are taking and have that inform your marketing strategy, and then validate that with the best attribution and tracking that you'd have in place.
What are some key metrics that people should think about when they're trying to build their CLV model?
Yeah, again, depending on your business, but e-commerce business, you could look at like average order value. SaaS business, you want to look at survivability of your customers, subscription revenue over time to kind of layer that into LTV. So those are like the metrics that you want to work into that. Once you do that, then you can actually start making some more interesting kind of buying decisions when it comes to media.
If you don't have a model yet, starting simple would generally be my advice. There's a really good one I always like to reference, the Wharton Buy Till You Die model, which is open source. You can plug it into any business and get some really useful outputs. All you really need is a customer ID, date of transaction, what the transaction value was, and you can add any other columns you want, like what was the geography. You have the date in there for when the transaction happened, and that's a great sort of starter out of the box solution that's available for free when thinking about figuring out where your valuable pockets are and what's going to be value over time for that same cohort of customers. The businesses that I work with that have gotten more sophisticated beyond that usually start with something like that and then start to incorporate a lot of offline metrics. So taking a look at, based on interactions you've had with, if it's an app, within the app, or if it's the website, have you viewed certain key pages? Again, it goes back to, are you collecting as much data as you can? And then do you have the people and tools in place to help make sense of that data?
I know, Jason, you've reorganized your team from a channel focus to a customer lifetime focus. Can you talk us through how you made that change and what it looks like now?
At my last job before Shopify, my team was very much focused on acquisition, just lead gen, getting people in. What we found is we were optimizing towards like a CPA by category based on what we expected those average order values to be by category. But as we started to move towards lifetime value, we started to recognize that there was obviously like people were buying accessories or purchasing into additional categories, and that actually increased how much we could invest in acquiring a customer. And from that, we made an initial reorg of that company to have our marketing team focus kind of full life cycle. And we broke it up into two groups, kind of acquisition and engagement and conversion focus. And we let our sales team really focus on conversion. A misstep there was actually creating the two silos. And so we'd have our marketing teams somewhat allocated to one group or the other. So we may have like a paid team that was only working in acquisition, and our email team or our content team was only working on the engagement side. And then that created like communication challenges and issues, and just considering, and these teams sat right beside each other, but there were just some like disconnects there. Part of what I'm looking to avoid at Shopify is keeping these folks under the same roof, creating a layer of leadership for those life cycle stages, and those folks are accountable for lighting up the right strategy across all channels and corralling those folks to do so. And then our channel teams are responsible for the talent and the systems to be able to activate across the entire customer journey.
What's been the hardest thing about bringing that to life?
At Shopify, a lot of our work has been focused on acquisition, and it is a product-first company. And there was this feeling that as we acquired customers, a lot of the merchant's success would be taken care of in the product, and a lot of it is. But marketing has a greater role to play in moving customers through that path to success. That was a big component of being able to make this change successfully, justifying that marketing could actually move into this space and add value to what the product was already doing in helping merchants achieve success. We can work in parallel in that journey in the product to ensure customers are coming back to the product or reminded of what the product has to deliver value to them. And those are the pieces now that we're able to build. But there was a lot of work put into justifying that that was the direction that we needed to move in and that we could deliver value in that direction.
We have lots of data that shows the best marketers, which means the ones that outperform their targets, are 1.5 more times likely to use LTV. So that sounds pretty compelling to me, but it feels like people need more evidence. They need more convincing.
I think it's, for me, when I've seen those moments, it's come down to testing, particularly if we're talking about paid marketing. I'll use AdWords as an example, like doing a draft and experiment campaign, looking at optimizing towards the same, let's say, call it, even if you were using automated bidding, but taking 50% of that traffic and running your current strategy, taking the other half of the traffic and optimizing to a different target. So if you're using a target CPA or target return on ad spend bid strategy, loading in lifetime value metrics alongside that. And I think I've seen a lot of aha moments from that specifically because over time we can track the performance of those campaigns and find more customers who are like your best customers. And I've seen that materialize, I think, dozens of times. Sometimes I think it requires a push from leadership just to make sure that incentives are aligned. Sometimes some of this responsibility lives in like a business intelligence team, but they have their own KPIs and metrics that they're optimizing against. So I think it's framing the challenge as an investment opportunity for the company. I think that can get people rallied around that piece.
What are some examples of like incentives that made a lot of sense? Like, I think let's get like a tangible example that people could steal with pride if they wanted to.
Increased revenue, I think, and company success, I think, are like the biggest ones. And oftentimes, I think that's where leadership plays a huge role, just in making sure that the resources you have in roles are working on the highest impact problems. And I think, especially from a marketing perspective, that's the way to do it.
At Shopify, we're at a point where we're kind of optimizing all of our marketing against an average lifetime value that we had of our customers. And there was a vertical where we decided to pull the plug because our customer acquisition cost was way too high. The calculation of LTV in our company was something that was evolving as well. Access to the data teams to evolve that calculation was a challenge, as I can imagine it will be for many companies. But as we had really stopped investing in this one vertical of ours, several months later, as we evolved our LTV calculation and outlook by different segments of customers that we were bringing in, we realized that this segment was actually incredibly valuable to us. And so we kind of lost 3 to 4 months of acquiring these folks because we'd use this like average LTV across the organization as opposed to LTV by different customer segments. We quickly reactivated our marketing efforts for that segment, but that's like possibly one of the, it needs to be an ongoing process. It needs to continuously be looked at once you do solve for calculating LTV at your company. Continue to have a team like dedicated to that to evolve your perspective on that measure.
Are there pockets of excellence for LTV models?
I think the ones that are maybe a little bit more of a closed environment, like dating and gaming, I think are two that are quite advanced in the space because a lot of interaction happens directly within the app. And my advice there to sort of mirror what they do regardless of your business, if it's downloading white papers or taking some of those more upper funnel activities, is just making sure that your analytics team is logging as many events as possible and maintaining where you've paid to reach a customer throughout that customer's entire journey with your product or service. So for example, with Google, every time an ad's clicked, there's a Google Click ID that's generated, and you can attach that to a customer and see what happens with that customer, see if they're clicking on an ad again. And if you're using other platforms like Facebook, there's also similar IDs that are published for clicks as well.
Most businesses know that their data is probably one of their greatest assets. but there's an overwhelming amount of data to decipher. So how can companies unlock the power of their first-party data, and what insights should they go mining for?
Hire a data engineer to mine this data for you. You have it. It may feel like it's unstructured and a mess and it's not usable. Someone can make sense of it. If you don't have someone in-house that could do that already, find someone. This data is valuable to you. So yeah, try to leverage it as quickly as you can. But I think it just represents your customer's journey with your product. It could drive all sorts of activity to increase lifetime value or revenue downstream beyond acquisition.
How do we get better at predicting intent, if you will, and what role does machine learning and automation have in that?
Getting insight back to the channels that you're paying to acquire customers for as quickly as possible is one thing I've seen some companies do quite well. Beyond just waiting for that customer to close and that lead to materialize and come in, but sending that information back to the platforms where you're paying to acquire customers. So for example, with Google Ads, we can import offline data. So the second you know something about a customer, you can send that back to Google and say, actually, that click was worth this amount, and it's more than I thought it would be, or it's less than I thought it would be, and use all the machine learning that's built into those platforms to optimize against finding more customers who fit that profile. So it's dynamically adjusting conversion value would be maybe the simplest way to take advantage of that, and doing it in a siloed way first, because I think if you're working with companies like Google and Facebook, you can probably send that information separately and optimize for each platform independently if that's a big chunk of your marketing budget. But if you're thinking more holistically and you have an attribution model in place, it would be doing that modeling first somewhere else. I think in your analytics platform or something custom that sits in a cloud, and then pushing that information back. So that's really the way to get towards predictive.
Also, as you get a handle on your data and start kind of mapping that journey out and the different transactions that your customer may be taking with you, or kind of what I was talking about earlier, just like segmenting by different levers that you may have in your business. So like what's the LTV of customer on plan A versus plan B versus plan C? Once you know that, then your marketing can start to position plan C, and you can start making forecasts about acquiring so many customers on plan C versus plan B over a period of time. And then you can actually start projecting what kind of revenue you'll have in the future, knowing that incremental lift. And that's even just from an acquisition perspective. Once you start looking at like cross-sell opportunities or like upgrade opportunities, now you can actually start investing in marketing after somebody has become a customer. Once you know what that incremental lift of that cross-sell or upgrade is, that could inform how much marketing you spend. How many dollars you spend on the marketing to actually drive that action. And again, it comes down to like get the LTV calculation done for your customers. Understand what the different levers are that you want to know move LTV one way or the other, and then have that inform some of your marketing strategy to activate those levers.
We could finish off with 3 things you would tell our audience for something they could implement tomorrow.
I think the first thing to do would be, if you're on like a last click model, let's say in paid marketing, switch to something like a data-driven model or anything else, and start to build the comfort comparing what results look like differently. That would maybe be the first thing I'd look at. The second thing would be, what's your data collection and exploitation strategy, I'll call it. So what are you collecting and how are you using it? And then the last thing, I think, would just be looking at how incentives are aligned in your marketing organizations for people working on these problems, and making sure that everyone is optimizing towards something like revenue or profit as part of their KPIs.
Exactly. Like get to a source of truth as soon as you can for all the touch points of your customer. Do that as quickly as possible. Critically review the KPIs that your teams are working on. If the teams are working against different KPIs, know or communicate to them how they ladder into each other. Or if teams are working against one KPI, ensure that they know how or what the business results look like after they're bringing these folks in, whether it's just a lead or a prospect or some other KPI prior to actual revenue coming in. Help them understand what that is, and that could actually help them make better decisions. I think hire. I've seen like get the posting out for a data analyst. I think there's so much value in having these folks in-house. I know there's a lot of like free tools and things that can help you do that outside of a body. But if you could bring someone in that is passionate about this and you can point them at your data and have them solve this problem for you, that can mobilize your entire company to really move the needle when it comes to driving revenue for your business based on the insights that this person can pull out for you.
Great, thanks guys. So with that, I would like to thank Matt and Jason for being here tonight.